Right, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayerStoo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayerStoo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayerStoo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot, and you're an absolute legend to us. All right, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going good, Mark. I'm pretty exhausted today from a really extensively long couple of days of work, so you're getting me low energy.
Low energy Camley, that's what we call them.
But yeah, good to see you as ever. How are you getting on?
Yeah, not bad. You'll be glad to know that my room is now full of soft furnishings again. I have a carpet. I now no longer sound as if I'm recording in a church hall, which is fantastic. I do have to apologise to all the listeners. The sound was way worse than I thought it was going to be when I started doing the edit. So thank you for persisting through the podcast with that terrible sound. I genuinely know how difficult that can be sometimes. I really struggle with podcasts that have really bad sound. So if you stuck with us through that episode, I very much appreciate it. And I hope that we sound way better this time round. So yeah. But Lewis, enough about my fucking carpet. What have you been playing this week?
That's what the podcast should be on. Well, I have basically just been finishing off Resident Evil 8 this week, Mark. As I said last week, I was pretty near the end. I did wrap it up on Friday night, but basically since then, between having some guests up who I had to entertain and this crazy work week, which has meant I've been working until midnight at times, that's just the way life is right now. So I haven't really played much else at all beyond finishing that off. I don't really think I've got too much else to add. The final sections are totally bonkers, and I quite enjoyed them, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
You know, it gets even more actiony. There is a section that we were talking about a little bit off air that is quite intensely action-focused in a way that the rest of the game doesn't reach, even though the rest of it is also an action game.
Yeah, that section that you're talking about there is that is the sort of action that I hope the game doesn't become, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. It doesn't feel in keeping with the kind of tone or the spirit of Resident Evil, or certainly these most recent Resident Evil games. I think if they tightened up that gameplay a bit and they went for something that felt a little bit more like a Doom game or something, you know, I don't want to spoil what's going on, but essentially there is just wave after wave after wave of enemy, and you're quite often completely surrounded, but you're tooled up in a way that you can deal with that. And I didn't think it was super well designed in terms of I just felt at times that I was kind of surrounded in a way that, you know, it didn't feel intentional, basically. It just felt like I was stuck in a corner and there was people all around me. You know, and again, I don't want to spoil what's going on there, so I won't say more than that. But overall, I enjoyed it. I thought the end was good, bombastic, kind of stupid fun. The plot, which had been quite thin through the rest of the game, I think it's fair to say, it doesn't really give you much story until the final couple of hours, really.
There is quite a big dump of exposition at the end, I will give you that, yes.
Yeah, it adds all this extra detail at the end. I think it sets it up for an interesting future potentially, which I'm quite glad to see. That I was quite worried as the game was coming to an end that we were basically seeing the end of this first person version of Resident Evil potentially, but it looks like they've got ideas for where it could go potentially. And yeah, happy with it overall. Still think I preferred 7 marginally, but there's not a hell of a lot in it, and yeah, I enjoyed my time with it, even though it took far too long for me to finish this ultimately quite short game.
Yeah, I think life just got in the way a bit for you there, but really, do you know what I mean, man?
It really has.
That hams to the best of his list.
Yeah,
you know?
I think I would quite like a game next that isn't so stressful in the moment to moment, because that just slowed me down as well when things in real life are quite busy. So I think maybe next I'll play something a bit more chill, and then I'll pick up something else a bit more serious after that.
Nice one, man. Sounds good to me.
What have you been playing, Mark?
Well, Lewis, I have also finished the game that has taken me far too long to finish, which is Cyberpunk 2077. Honestly, I'm not going to add too much to this either. I've been going on about this game for weeks. Honestly, the ending of the story to me was a bit underwhelming, although I have now discovered that I definitely got the bad ending to the game. But narratively speaking, it seemed like the logical choice, basically. But as it turns out, this was not the thing to do. It was bad and it ended bad, and it was very depressing. So there we go. In terms of the actual gameplay, the story overall, by the way, was fine, and that you can get better endings, so take that with a pinch of salt. But the gameplay in and of itself was fine. The hacking elements, some of them were good. I don't think that they were used as interestingly as they could have been. The driving was absolutely shite. I hated it. I hated every moment of the driving, and I went on a huge tirade in one of our previous podcasts about that. I will not do it again here. The RPG system felt largely pointless. It felt a bit empty, a bit unnecessary. I think that it could have been stripped from the game entirely, and you wouldn't have missed very much, to be completely honest. And the game did crash on me, I would say. In 55 hours of playing this game, I think it probably crashed somewhere between 10 and 15 times in that span, which is, with all the will in the world, quite a lot. It's definitely the game that has probably crashed on me the most ever, potentially. is still pretty unstable despite patches and whatever. But on PS5, it is basically playable. Overall, the game is fine. You should not feel obligated to play it. If you don't think it's anything that will interest you at all, then don't feel obligated to play this game. It's nothing special. But at the same time, if you do think it's going to be something that will be of interest to you, then you will definitely find something to cling on to there. Do you know what I mean? This is by no means a bad game, despite the crashes. The crashes are actively bad. But beyond that, in terms of like actual gameplay and actual story and whatever, it's totally fine. It's fine. But Lewis, after that, I've played a game which is way, way, way better than Cyberpunk 2077, and that is Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is so good. I absolutely love Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I was playing the integrated DLC, which recently came out. Now, honestly, it's just more Final Fantasy VII, and that is no bad thing at all. That is no bad thing at all, and you basically didn't have to twist my arm at all to make me play more Final Fantasy VII Remake. You play as Yuffie in this one. She feels great to play, to be honest with you. She very much feels like her own character. She has her own style. You play along with your sort of side characters in your party called Sonon, I think is his name. You don't actually get to control him, which is different from how the party system worked in the sort of main game. You just sort of issue him commands and whatever. But I mean, I don't miss that because Yuffie's great to play, so it's totally fine. Honestly, Lewis, the time that I spent playing this game, the vast majority of it was playing a game called Fort Condor, which is an in-game mini-game.
Okay.
And Fort Condor is an actual place / mini-game in the original Final Fantasy VII as well, which you wouldn't have got to because I believe you only played Midgar of the original game, but this is actually a mini game from the previous game, but it's like totally different now, and it's a sort of tower defense / auto battler type of vibe going on, and I fucking loved it. It was great. Like, and I was just like, you know what, this is quite low intensity and I'm quite enjoying this, and there was a whole bunch of them to do, and I just went, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to go and do all these, and it was really good. But ultimately it's just more Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it's great. I absolutely love this game. See, going back to this from Cyberpunk, I was just like, oh, it's so polished and clean and I like it, and everything just works and I don't have to worry about bugs, and everything's great and everything's animated really nicely. Everything looks bright and is interesting, and I was just like, oh god, video games should be like this. They should all be like this. Cyberpunk, why aren't you this good? No, it was great though. I like genuinely, I came back to it from Cyberpunk, which by the end of it did feel like a wee bit of a slog, and I was just like, this is a total breath of fresh air.
Very good. Well, yeah, glad to hear that. So have you finished the DLC now then?
Oh no, I'm not. So I think the DLC overall, like if you're doing all the side stuff and whatever, which I am going to do, is about 6-ish hours, and I've probably spent like 2 or 3, and most of it was sticking around doing side stuff, so I'm not anywhere near finished it, to be honest with you, so I will report back further when I play more. But yeah, the Fort Condor minigame, if anyone plays Final Fantasy Integrated DLC, it's really good. I really enjoyed it. It's just a dumb little minigame, but it's great. Anyway, Lewis, enough of that. Time for the news. Alright, news item number 1. Nintendo have finally announced the long-awaited Switch Pro, but it might not be the announcement that you were looking for. Certainly wasn't the announcement I was looking for, Liz. It is officially called the Nintendo Switch open brackets OLED model close brackets. That is a ridiculous name, but that is genuinely what it's called, which will launch on October the 8th, so not that far away at all. Upgrades include a 7-inch OLED screen, as you might have guessed, this being upgraded from the 6.2-inch LCD. They have also increased the internal storage to 64 gigs from 32 gigs, so a doubling there. They've improved the audio with better speakers on handheld mode, and they have added an Ethernet port for docked mode now, which is sort of madness that they never had that in the first place. And they have also got a better, more stable, adjustable kickstand, but let's face it, that's not something you're upgrading for. That's kind of it, Luce, which means that it's pretty underwhelming because it doesn't have 4K support in docked mode, which was rumoured by Bloomberg and I thought was definitely a slam dunk and isn't there. It still doesn't have Bluetooth, which is insanity for a handheld device. insanity and incredibly frustrating that it's not there. It has the same CPU, it has the same RAM, it has the same resolution in handheld mode, albeit with a much better OLED screen, but it is the same resolution. It has the same battery life, and it has the same drifting Joy-Cons. So, to be honest with you, the upgrades really aren't good enough, in my opinion. It also has a price tag of $350. As of this recording, there is no UK price or EU price. That price point is dangerously close to the PS5 Digital Edition and is more expensive than the Xbox Series S. So, Lewis, basically, unless you play your Switch a lot, and you play your Switch a lot in handheld mode, to the point that you feel as if you could benefit from the bigger, better screen, then maybe you want to consider upgrading. But honestly, my Switch spends 80% of its time in the dock, and that means that 80% of the time, upgrading will literally, and I mean literally in the most literal way, makes no difference. These upgrades would make no difference at all if you play your Switch primarily in docked mode, because it's the same CPU, it's the same RAM, it's the same 1080p output that you always had. It's just the same, and I'll never use that Ethernet port. If you don't already own a Switch, you sort of might as well buy a new one because the price differential isn't that much. I think it's $60. It remains to be seen how much that's going to be here in the UK. But otherwise, for the 85 million people that already own a Switch, in my opinion, there is almost no need to upgrade whatsoever. And to be honest with you, that is really disappointing because I sort of want an upgrade.
What a strange and sad end to this saga. We've been talking about this for so long.
Listen, it's so disappointing, mate. It's so disappointing.
For me, this has always been a bit of a will I, won't I? And so I'm not going to sit here and say I feel vindicated in any sense, because it's just simply not, it's not the proposition that we've been talking about.
No.
Like, I was thinking when I saw the announcement earlier, and I was right in the middle of work, so I couldn't properly look at it at that point, but I was expecting that our conversation tonight, Mark, would be you saying to me, well, okay, is this enough for you to upgrade? Because you've asked me that before, and, you know, it's a big part of our discussion around this. But then when I finally got to look into it properly, I was like, well, there's just nothing to this. It feels very similar to me to when a year or so ago when they released that version that had a very slightly better battery life, you know?
I mean, it's a bit more than that, you know what I mean?
It is a bit more than that, for sure, but it's just not a pro model. I think it's a misnomer to refer to it as a pro model, which obviously we have all been doing up to this point. And if this really is all that was ever being worked on, I do wonder whether something's changed. You know, the chip shortage has meant that they couldn't go ahead with what they were planning and they just wanted to get a better screen version out or something. But as you've said, Mark, I can't see any reason for the likes of you and I, certainly. I'm in exactly the same boat that my Switch, certainly during the pandemic, has not left its dock for some time. And if it does, it's to play it in bed. It's, you know, I don't need it to be the glitziest, best looking machine in the world. Other than that, maybe people who bought a Switch Lite and who've got really into it and would want to have a docked version could upgrade to this. But beyond that, Mark, like you say, 85 million people that currently have one, I don't see a huge amount of need to buy this.
No, not at all. Like I said, in that scenario that you painted there, like if you just had the Switch Lite and you do want a docked Switch, I think that you would be as well buying the better one, to be honest. There's not a huge price differential. I think it's about $50 between the OLED version and the standard version. For the sake of 50 quid, do you know what I mean? I would probably just go for the better version. And you want the best one you can, let's be honest. But for people like me and you that already have one, there's just no need. There's no need to upgrade at all, and that's really disappointing. I mean, no CPU boost at all. Nothing. There was talk about them getting like NVIDIA chipsets in and things like that. None of that has materialised. Not even 4K, which I thought was the fucking minimum we were going to get. I mean, the more and more I looked into it, the more and more I was disappointed. When I first seen this, I was like, oh my god, yes, this is fantastic. I cannot wait to watch this trailer. But the more and more I looked into it after I watched the trailer, the more and more I was like, this isn't anything. This is really not very much at all. And it's certainly not something I'm bothered about upgrading to. Not in the slightest. Alright, Lewis, news item number 2. PlayStation have come under fire this week from indie devs who basically claim that they have failed to properly support their smaller indie games on the platform. Basically, this has come down to a series of tweets by Ian Gardner, who's the co-founder of Neon Doctrine, who made a series of claims, but basically it comes down to 1, bad communication on Sony's part. It seems that the developers can wait weeks or even months for a reply, if they get a reply at all, which is really, really not on. 2, a lack of transparency or help from Sony to navigate what seems to be a hellish bureaucratic process to get their games on the platform in the first place. Apparently this is way worse than both Xbox and Nintendo when trying to do similar things. 3, the inability to manage their games when they are actually on the platform, including the inability to discount games when they want to. And 4, the inability for players to discover these games on their platform, specifically the fact that they could not participate in PlayStation sales unless they were invited, which basically never happened. And I did actually know that PlayStation sales are highly curated, and I knew as well that devs couldn't just discount games whenever they wanted, and I believe that Lucas Pope was actually someone else who had made a comment along those lines as well, that it was ridiculous that his game could be discounted everywhere else except for on PlayStation, because PlayStation just wouldn't allow him to do it, which is not really on at all, is it? So I have to admit, Lewis, when this story first broke, I literally thought that this was a guy venting on Twitter that his games weren't doing very well on PlayStation. And in my defence, his Twitter thread does read a bit like that, to be completely honest. But this does seem to be a real problem at PlayStation. And I think that my head was basically still in the PS3 generation, where indies were doing really great on the PlayStation platform. PlayStation really supported them. I think because of that, I always assume that indies do pretty well on PlayStation. But in recent years, really, Xbox and definitely Nintendo, but also Xbox, have surpassed PlayStation in supporting indie devs. And in fact, in an article by Rebecca Valentine, which I'm referencing here, so there's 2 really great articles. There's an article by Rebecca Valentine over at IGN, and there's an article by Jason Schreier at Bloomberg, both covering this, both of which were really great. But in Rebecca Valentine's article, she quotes a dev who claims that 3% of their sales came from PlayStation. And as PlayStation are the biggest platform holder in the world, or the biggest console platform holder in the world, I should say, that is pathetic, frankly, and they should be embarrassed about that. PlayStation do have a fantastic slate of indie games coming up, but it seems as though if you aren't one of those chosen few, which PlayStation will put a lot of marketing behind, the ability to get your game found on the PlayStation Store is so unlikely versus Xbox and Nintendo, who have specific discover sections and things like that to help promote specifically these types of indie games. And although I'm saying PlayStation have a fantastic slate of indie games coming up, they are games like Solar Ash and things, which, although are indie games, are much more higher echelon indie games, for lack of a better term. Do you know what I mean? Solar Ash, I don't know how much the dev costs of that are going to be, but I reckon it's probably well over $1 million, whereas these are games that we're talking about that are probably less than $50,000, you know? And honestly, this is really sad. One, because I love indie games, and I keep on going on about how much I love indie games on this podcast. To think that the platform holder that I like a lot of the time is the worst at supporting them is pretty depressing, particularly when I, for a long time, thought that they were pretty good at it. Yeah, it's not great at all. And as I said, them not supporting these people who creatively are the absolute lifeblood of the industry, not supporting them as the biggest console platform holder in the world is embarrassing, and they should take steps immediately to sort this out. In their defence, I think that they have, in terms of the bureaucracy and whatever, like tried to streamline the process for people, which I think was just hellishly bad. They also put Yushi Yoshida at the top of the indie game program at PlayStation, which said a lot. They also set up a $10 million indie fund to help indie games survive through the pandemic, which was great. But in reality, right now, indie devs are having a bad fucking time on PlayStation, and that is the bottom line.
It does seem that way, yeah. It seems like, despite the good steps that you say PlayStation have taken, it does seem to be a little bit like, if you're inside the circle, you're fine. But if you're not, if you're just a small developer, if you're just a small 2 or 3 person team, you've got a little kind of, fairly throwaway game, but if it got in front of people, some people would buy it, some people would download and play it. That is just not getting any support from PlayStation. And yeah, I think that, we had a discussion about it at the time when the story broke, and there was a lot of conflicting opinions across the internet at that point. And I do think it would be easy to dismiss this if it was just someone saying, please give me more marketing support, Sony. And, as you had kind of said at that point, and as others were, and rightfully saying, Sony doesn't really owe anyone that. But I think what they do owe people who are trying to sell through their shop is, that you put the game on the shelf at least. You don't leave it in the back store cupboard and hope that someone asks for it. That feels a little bit like what that guy was essentially saying to me.
Yeah, I actually think that's a fantastic analogy, actually. Yeah. Like, if this were a physical brick and mortar shop, it doesn't even feel as if these games are on the shelf. To be honest with you, it doesn't even feel as if they're in the back. It feels as if they're out in the alley.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
There's just no way to find these games unless you specifically know that they are there and to ask for them, basically. And that manifests itself on the PlayStation Store as either to search for these games or you will never find these games. Yeah. That's it.
Exactly. And it's just when you do consider that the other platforms are doing this a bit better and they are foregrounding games through things like Game Pass or just on Switch, so there's just a constant deluge of games that, that come out every Thursday and there's lists and lists of them and people talk about them and share them. You go onto the eShop. I mean, the problem with the eShop is that it's too hard to filter through a lot of that stuff.
Well, I think that Nintendo and certainly Steam might have the opposite problem in this, but there has to be middle ground here, man. Like,
absolutely.
There has to be, absolutely. Like, PlayStation are too far on the wrong side of this, and to be honest with you, I would much rather it was more like Nintendo, who do sell huge numbers of indie games, and indie games love that platform because they do sell big numbers over there. It's much better to be like that and for us to have to wade through like a couple of games that we've never heard of and will never care about than for indie devs to have their games completely lost on the platform. It's not even a competition there as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, yeah. Discoverability is so important these days, and the games press and people like ourselves and that talk about games can fill in some of the gaps for that. But you should be able to go onto the storefront of your chosen platform and find all sorts of different games, and they could foreground them and all of that stuff. And then when you take in the bureaucratic nightmare as you were describing it, that one of the points
that wasn't me, that was the devs. The devs are describing it that way.
One of the points that he had made was that you're told at one point you should have an account manager who can tell you how to get your game put on sale, and when you ask who that account manager is, they say, oh, we don't know and we can't tell you, and this other process has to tell you that part. It's just like the worst version of a large company at work, that the parts are disjointed and you as the person trying to use that service are kind of caught in the middle of it all. It's just not good enough at all. It's not fair on those developers. I think you made a good point there, Mark, when you said these are the people are the lifeblood. People might be looking at this story. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other big Sony fans like ourselves who will be thinking we shouldn't be criticising Sony for this. These people don't necessarily deserve any extra support. But these people might be making the Naughty Dog games of the future. They might be part of the Insomniac team in 15 years' time or whatever. So you really don't want to irritate these people. You don't want to make them feel unloved or completely just uncared about. They are trying to sell stuff through your system and you are taking a cut and you are charging them to be featured and all of that stuff. So it is not good enough. It does strike at that thing that we were talking about a little bit before the PS5 launch of Sony going slightly back towards arrogant market leader Sony and not trying to regain its status, doing the best thing for all people involved. That I think you're right in saying was kind of where they were in the PS3 generation. So I really hope they sort this out. I think it's a really bad look.
Absolutely. Interesting that you should say that as well. And Rebecca Valentine's article, which we will link to in the show notes over at PlayerStoo.com, and I would encourage everyone to read because it is fantastic. She quoted another indie dev that said whatever platform is quote-unquote winning tends to not support indie devs very much, and the one that is quote-unquote losing does tend to, which was exactly PlayStation's situation in the PS3 generation and was the Xbox's situation in the last generation. You should learn from your mistakes, you know what I mean, Sony? This is obviously a good thing to be doing, and neglecting these people is not good for anyone. It's not even good for us, the gamers. You know what I mean? You're denying us visibility of these games. And I think the word marketing was banded around quite a lot, but really what these people want is visibility on the platform and discoverability on the platform, and quite frankly I don't think that's very much to ask.
Absolutely not. And the ability to put your own game on sale for sure.
yeah that as well. Jesus Christ, to be honest with you, there's 1,000 different ways that we could go down here to talk about this for a very, very long time, but at the end of the day, Sony's not doing a good enough job to support indie devs, and that has to change. Alright, list news item number 3. It has been rumoured that Hideo Kojima has signed a letter of intent to work with Xbox on his next game. Now, I'm sure that I don't have to tell many of you what a big deal this is, because despite never actually having worked directly for PlayStation, I don't know that there is anyone who's more associated with PlayStation than Hideo Kojima. This all comes from Jeff Grubb over at VentureBeat, who has been saying for months that Xbox and Kojima were in discussions about a partnership. Interestingly, he did say that Kojima would be making a cloud-based game using xCloud. Xbox recently hired ex-Stadia employee and ex-Portal dev Kim Swift to oversee cloud-based games at Xbox, but also apparently that hire was specifically to assist Kojima in making this game a reality. It also seems as though the point of this partnership was basically to let Kojima go wild with his team and his creativity to make a cloud game, whatever that might turn out to be, rather than to greenlight a specific project, which I think is quite interesting in and of itself. It is also worth pointing out that Jeff Grubb has also said that it is very unlikely that whatever deal is in place would prohibit Kojima from working with other companies, i.e. this does not mean that Microsoft will be buying Kojima Productions, and it is certainly not spelling the end of Kojima working with PlayStation, or doesn't necessitate that anyway. But, I mean, at the end of the day, this would be absolutely huge, and I tell you what, I believe this a hell of a lot more than I believe any of that abandoned bullshit looks.
Well, I mean, possibly it's more true than those things. I mean, neither of them have too much kind of reliable information out there in the world yet. But yeah, this has been bubbling away for quite a while. I suppose this idea that Kojima and Xbox might be making some kind of deal. And yeah, from the perspective of the technology that Xbox can offer him, and also you've got to think about Game Pass, and just, you don't have to convince people to buy a weird Death Stranding style game if you just put it on Game Pass.
That's true.
So those two things combined, you know, there's a really strong argument for it here. You know, as primarily a PlayStation gamer, I'd be sad to see Kojima release only on Xbox, but, you know, I'm using that term sad very, very, very lightly. It'll be great for Xbox, it'll be great for people who are playing there. If it allows Kojima to do something exciting, then fantastic, but we're probably miles off this happening yet. I mean, a letter of intent, is that worth the paper it's written on? It's maybe very slightly worth that, who knows?
Well, I mean, it shows intent, I guess. I mean, I don't really know what that's worth. I mean, I think it's safe to say that there's no hard and fast deal in place currently. We know that Kojima is currently working on this Death Stranding Director's Cut. I think that we could see another Kojima game between the Death Stranding Director's Cut and whatever this turns out to be, because, as you said, this could be a ways away, or if it's not a ways away, and the fact that it's a cloud game as well, whatever that even means, as we were talking a little bit before the podcast. Yeah. Like, we don't even know what a cloud-based game really means, apart from that it's only available through the cloud. But how does that manifest itself? I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't like a massive game either, you know what I mean, because of those things, because of the tie-in to the cloud-based gaming. But man, it would be real interesting. It's real interesting. It would be very interesting to see how all this shakes out. Yeah, very interesting. And latest news item number 4. GTA 6 could still be 4 years away and is apparently still only in the early stages of production. This is according to industry insider Tom Henderson, who is no relation, who has apparently previously leaked accurate details about Battlefield 2042. And this has now been corroborated by Jason Schreier and VGC sources. Henderson claimed that GTA 6 would be released either in 2024 or 2025. This is partly due to Rockstar's new focus on employee well-being, which is something that they had come under fire for during the development of Red Dead Redemption 2 and GTA 5, which apparently had very bad crunch periods. Schreier last year said that GTA 6 was a ways away and that it wouldn't be coming any earlier than 2023, but that was before a global pandemic happened, which has almost certainly disrupted the development in some capacity. So 2024, 2025, maybe we shouldn't be that surprised about that at all, Lewis, really. Henderson also claimed that the new game would take place in a modern day Vice City and that the map will change and expand over time, and I've seen this compared to a Fortnite map on multiple occasions now. Schreier had also said last year that GTA 6 could launch as a moderately sized game and then regularly expand over time, which ties in with what Henderson was saying, and this is something that VGC sources have also heard as well, apparently. So, firstly, Lewis, I think that the fact that GTA 6 is still a ways away isn't too surprising, although I was still thinking more in line with 2023 than 2025, to be completely honest with you. But if they are taking their time over the game in order to benefit their employees, fantastic. I'm totally fine with that. I'm sure that there will be plenty of great and interesting games to play in the meantime. Totally cool. Take your time, Rockstar. Secondly, and I think more interestingly, what do you make of this expanding/changing map that is being compared to Fortnite?
I think that is totally fascinating. Hearing it, not that I'd ever imagined it beforehand, but hearing it, it feels like it makes sense for Grand Theft Auto and for what Grand Theft Auto is these days, that you can change that and expand on it and take you to different places. You know, they just had in the online mode not too long ago that expansion to a tropical island that was like another mission or a set of missions. I don't know, I never played it, but you can imagine that that's the direction they'll go down. The interesting thing to me, though, is that it has to in some way remove the traditional single player game unless you offer that on a subscription model or something. Like, how do you release a game that is quote unquote moderately sized so you and I buy it and we play it and we beat the campaign? Then what happens? Like, if they add another section or they change a bit, do you get new missions? If it's just that the open world evolves and changes, that's one thing. If it's something that can bring new content, that's a particularly exciting thing to me. But if it ends up just being that GTA 6 is basically just GTA Online in a new map, I mean, that will absolutely be exciting for a lot of people. It's not really what I would be looking for from it, but I mean, let's be honest, Grand Theft Auto is a platform these days. It's not really a straightforward game basically anymore. And so with all the crazy modes that they've added online and stuff like that, that is definitely going to underpin what this next iteration is. And because of all of that and all the changes that's going to take, and the fact that GTA 5 Online is still going strong and they're just about to bring out the new console versions, I'm not surprised at all if this takes a good couple of years more. Like, GTA Online is not dead. It's nowhere near dead.
No, not at all. And from that perspective, yeah, I mean, they certainly don't need to be doing this. But if it is going to be this changing map, that to me says that GTA, as me and you knew it from GTA 3 right up to GTA 5 before GTA Online, I think that this might be a pivot away from that and towards GTA Online being what GTA is. I think that we might have like a big chunk of story, do you know what I mean? I think it might still be worth playing as a single player game, but in terms of the expansiveness of that story, the expansiveness of the map sounds as if it's been reined in. I wonder how much this is going to feel like a traditional GTA game and how much it's going to now feel like an online game with story elements, you know?
Yeah, I think you could be right there. Honestly, there's aspects about that I find interesting, but it's just to what extent, you know, is it a case that your character is flying to Los Santos for the new expansion and there's actually like 3 or 4 hours of new content there and a bit of world to explore and stuff? I think there's potential here to do something really interesting given where we're at technologically as well. The thing that I worry about is that it will just be these, you know, big servers full of people griefing each other. That was always my experience of GTA Online. If it's just the case of you have to be online with loads of strangers, I hope it's not fully that, but I'm excited either way. Like, let's see what Rockstar come up with. Like, they have not really let us down yet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I have faith in Rockstar. It'll be very interesting to see what this turns out to be. Alright, Lewis, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1, free games, Lewis. First podcast of the month, and that means free games. On PlayStation Plus, you are getting A Plague's Tale: Innocence on the PlayStation 5, Call of Duty Black Ops 4 on the PlayStation 4, and WWE 2K Battlegrounds on the PlayStation 4 as well. On Games Pass this month, on July the 8th, you're getting Dragon Quest Builders 2, Tropicana 6, and UFC 4. On July the 15th, you're getting Bloodroots, Farming Simulator 19, and The Medium. One thing that I would like to point out here is that a lot of those games are coming to cloud, but The Medium specifically is coming to cloud, and The Medium was supposed to be one of the early games that was really utilising the Series X hardware specifically. It was sort of running 2 worlds in tandem that wasn't able to be done on the previous generation hardware, and the fact that that is now coming to cloud gaming, I think, is indicative of the fact that they've changed over the back-end technology from the Xbox One to the Series X to enable that to happen, which is very cool. And leaving Games Pass this month on July the 14th is EA Sports UFC and EA Sports UFC 2, and on July the 15th, Endless Space 2, Downwell, and Crosscode are all leaving as well. Alright, shout out number 2. We did get the announcement that Ghost of Tsushima is indeed getting a director's cut, which will include the rumoured Icky Island DLC. This will also include the PlayStation 5 upgrades, including DualSense haptic feedback, 3D audio, 4K and 60 FPS support, and Japanese lip sync for the Japanese voiceover of the game. The trailer, I think, looked really great. The new island looks really cool as well. I think that we can both probably agree from that perspective. But the pricing of this is where things get a bit confusing. So, if you don't own the game, it's $60 for the Director's Cut on PS4 and $70 for the Director's Cut on PS5, which is very much in line with PlayStation's new pricing. If you already own Ghost of Tsushima on PS4, it is $20 to upgrade to the Director's Cut on PlayStation 4, but $30 to upgrade to the Director's Cut on PlayStation 5. If you buy the Director's Cut on PlayStation 4, it is $10 to upgrade to the Director's Cut on PlayStation 5, which, with all the will in the world, is a bit confusing, Liz, because I still don't know if I can upgrade to the PlayStation 4 version of the Director's Cut on the PlayStation 5 and save myself a tenner, which I might well do because I'm not that bothered about the PlayStation 5 upgrades, or if I will be forced to upgrade to the PlayStation 5 version because I'm on a PlayStation 5, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I don't know what the answer would be, though.
Because it does very much imply the fact that there is a price differential between the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5 versions, that you are paying a premium for the PlayStation 5 updates, which, in the face of the fact that a lot of third parties are doing that for free, is a bit of a bad look. However, I'm not actually sure that that is what's happening. I think that you might just be paying £30 for the DLC on PlayStation 5, which also comes with the upgrades, and you're paying £20 for it on PS4, which obviously wouldn't come with any upgrades. And the $10 differential in price is the same all the way down. Do you know what I mean? Even if you bought the games new, there's still a $10 price differential. So to me, I'm not necessarily sure that that's for the upgrades specifically. It's more just for the PlayStation 5 version in general. But regardless, it's not a very good look. How this should have started is that everyone gets the PlayStation 5 upgrades, regardless of whether you buy the Director's Cut or not. And then the DLC is £20 on the PlayStation 4 or £30 on the PlayStation 5. That is how this should have worked. And then if you wanted to put out a Director's Cut of the game, then that's there for people to buy, that will include the core game and the DLC and the PlayStation 5 upgrade, should people want it, you know. I don't know why they've not done that. It's quite frustrating that they've not done that because this has made them look bad and has complicated things needlessly. I also would not be shocked at all if the Death Stranding Director's Cut follows the exact same complicated pricing structure.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on all those points, Mark. It's not the most straightforward. It is really disappointing. Whichever way it all balances out that way, we are basically being made to pay for PS5 upgrades. There is no way, as far as we know at least, to put your Ghost of Tsushima disc into your PS5 and download a PS5 patch that just gives you the better graphics and DualSense features. Like, that isn't something...
No, you have to have the Director's Cut. So you have to have the DLC to also get the PS5 upgrade.
You can't play the base game with the PS5 upgrades and ignore the DLC. That is not an option as far as we all understand at the moment, which I don't think is good. I think that PlayStation have needlessly complicated a lot of these upgrade systems. I was reading something about A Plague Tale Innocence earlier as well, which seemed to be suggesting that was all a bit messy in terms of how you upgrade from the PS4 to the PS5 version, and Xbox's across the board is just working. It just is much better and much smoother, and I think that all of that is something that PlayStation have to look at. But generally speaking, I think this is cool. I think the Director's Cut name is so stupid, and I hope that they don't keep persevering with this for a lot of games, because it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't have any bearing on video games in the way that it does for cinema. I think it means something different from what they think that it means, even. Yeah, I hope that goes away. But ultimately, new content for Ghost of Tsushima, that sounds great. I'm up for that, even though it's kind of clouded by a lot of weird other stuff. I'm quite excited. And
I'm definitely willing to pay for this DLC as well, by the way. I just want to make that very clear. Totally. More than happy to pay for it, 100%. Alright, let's shout out number 3. Konami and Bloober team have signed a new strategic cooperative agreement, e.g. they have agreed to make games with one another. This is something we basically already knew, because Bloober team CEO Peter Babieno had said that they were working on an existing horror IP from a very famous publisher, and while that might seem a bit nebulous and a bit jumping to conclusions to say that was obviously Silent Hill, this comment was made during Silent Hill Mania, and honestly, it was very obvious at the time that he was referring to Silent Hill. Reactions to this announcement seem to have ranged from underwhelming to downright angry, Bloober team does have a track record with horror games, their games being Lair of Fear, Observer, Blair Witch, and The Medium, but I think a lot of people have concerns because those games haven't actually been reviewed that great. I think they basically all have a Metacritic score of around 75 or less, depending on platform. That might vary a bit, but basically they're not blowing anyone away with their games, which I think might be a bit of a concern to people. And considering the last time that we saw a Silent Hill game, it was Kojima and it was PT, so they have an almost impossible task ahead of them to match that in terms of quality and hype and everything, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to give them the benefit of the doubt and see if they can improve on some of those scores with Silent Hill. But at the same time, I mean, there's definitely been some duffers in the Silent Hill series, and
I would argue at this point there've probably been more duffers than good games.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the fact that we were going to be getting a Kojima Silent Hill game, and the fact that Kojima Silent Hill game was looking extremely good, and now we have this team which people seem to lack confidence in. It's not setting up a good vibe,
for sure,
is what I'm trying to say.
But there was also rumours that Konami were also working with a high-profile Japanese developer on another Silent Hill project, so I wouldn't be surprised if what Bloober are working on is like a smaller game or a remake of the original or something like that, because The Medium felt very similar to the old Silent Hill games in terms of its kind of approach and its world building. I wouldn't be stunned if that's the kind of direction that goes, and then we get a proper big Silent Hill game, currently codenamed Abandoned, from the master himself, Hideo Kojima.
Absolutely bollocks. Alright, Lewis, final shout out number 4. PlayStation have bought another developer, Lewis, and it's not Bluepoint. Oh well, it's not been announced that it's Bluepoint yet, should I say. It is instead a PC port specialist, Nexus Games. They have ported Marvel's Avengers, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and the latest Tomb Raider trilogy to PC. I think this is very interesting. One, because it points to the fact that PlayStation are very much interested in expanding into the PC space in a big way, it sounds like. And also, now that they have a dedicated studio porting PC games, this could mean that the turnaround for having PlayStation ports could be significantly lessened. I seen in a couple of places, mainly on Twitter, that Nexus could be making their own IP, and if that is true, I couldn't really find much information on that, but if that is true, it could also mean the first tandem release on PC and PlayStation, because I can't imagine that if Nexus were making a game, it wouldn't be for PC if that's what their speciality is, you know?
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. It's an indication of total commitment now, I think, to PC gaming and to bringing stuff across there. So are you suggesting that a new game could be in development there?
I had heard on Twitter, or I'd seen on Twitter people posting about the fact that they were making their own IP. I don't even know if that will continue. Maybe PlayStation just want them to do ports or whatever. It seems to be very much their background. It seems to be very much what they're good at. So take that with a massive, ginormous grain of salt, I would say. But if they are, and if they are interested in pursuing their own IP, and if that is something that PlayStation would be interested in, then I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we could see a tandem PC PlayStation release, which would be a massive step, really, for PlayStation in terms of entering the PC space. Anyway, Lewis, I think it is time for a beer, and then we will be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is our play-along of Gris, Lewis. Gris is the first game by Spanish studio Nomada and is published by Devolver Digital. The name of the game, Gris, is actually Spanish for grey, and it was originally released back in December 2018. Now, Lewis, jumping straight in with the gameplay, I think it's fairly easy to say that this is a pretty straightforward puzzle platformer. While I would say that the puzzles in the game, none of them were particularly challenging. I don't know if you would agree with that, but they were all definitely interesting enough to keep me engaged as I was playing through them, you know?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. There's not a lot of challenge in the game. I think I'm right in saying that there are no fail states. You can't actually die or anything like that.
I believe that is correct as well, and I believe that was actually an accessibility choice by the studio as well, which is interesting.
I mean, I think it works for that. Like, I quite like in a game when you know that you're welcome to try things. If you're not quite sure what the solution to a puzzle is, that you can, hoy yourself off the edge of a thing and see if that's what you're supposed to do, and not worry too much about losing a big chunk of progress. But yeah, as you say, ultimately a pretty straightforward game. Not that it doesn't have the odd complicated puzzle or the odd platforming section which takes a wee bit of work, but yeah, generally speaking, pretty straightforward. It's much more about the experience than it is about the gameplay.
Certainly is. And with that, let's jump straight into the story, which I think is where we're going to kick off in earnest here. So the story really is the story of grief, and specifically is the story of grief using the Kubler-Ross model, which is the 5 stages of grief, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Within the game, these are all basically assigned a colour, and it's the way that the game uses these themes, which are pretty heavy, to be honest with you, along with the colours in the game. And it also ties into the mechanics as well, to tell the story of this woman, Gris, who is going through the grieving process, it seems. You're not really told who it is that she's lost, but it seems like a mother figure. Lewis, to be honest with you, I'm just going to get straight to the fucking point here. I am not sure that there are many games out there that broach such a big and difficult to navigate subject and execute it so well and so tactfully and ultimately just so beautifully, because I'm not sure that I have ever come across a game that is quite so beautiful as this one. I'm sort of scared to say this because I don't know how much you like this game, but I absolutely fucking adore my experience with this.
Oh,
it was
wow, okay,
incredible. Yeah. I did not expect to like this game anywhere near as much as I did.
Very interesting. Well, yeah, I guess in contrast to that, I mean, I really did enjoy it, but I wouldn't have gone off the charts with my praise for it. I think it's a very beautiful game, and I enjoyed that side of it as much as I kind of expected to. That is what I expected to take from it, but I did feel slightly let down by the simplicity of the gameplay, and felt like, you know, I was kind of going through the motions just to get the colours at the end of each section. So, but I'm intrigued because, like, I never felt like, I mean, I always knew it was about grief from moment one, really, because of, you know, it starts pretty much with a statue exploding and you fall to earth, and it feels very much like that. And obviously it's there, and there are even in-game trophies that you can unlock that relate to those 5 stages of grief.
Yeah, so the achievements as you go through the game, like, I mean, it tells you basically it's about grief. You know what I mean?
I think if you removed that, if you took away like literally the pop-ups that say that, I'm not sure that it always comes through in the clearest way, because I don't think each section, I couldn't say to you now, like, the section where you're kind of broadly underwater is about anger or is about denial.
Well, that bit specifically is blue and is coded with rain and being underwater and going deeper and going down and going into quite dark places. And a lot of the time it is literally black, which I think could also be added in as a colour here as fear, but that one was depression. It starts out in denial when you fall down and everything's white. And in fact, if you walk to the left instead of walking to the right, which is how all video gamers are coded to do, is walk to the right, but if you walk to the left, you actually see the fallen statue and you unlock an achievement that says denial. So you start denial as white, then you move on to the red area, which is anger. That is when you're getting blown by the wind, which was the first section you do, and probably my least favourite section, because I hated that, getting blown by the wind, and was actually quite angry playing that, so I think it achieved that quite well. Sorry, I didn't really realise that didn't come across to you, because I thought that stuff was coded quite well. I mean, it was literally, so denial is white, anger is red, bargaining is green, depression is blue, and acceptance is yellow. That is literally within the game, it tells you that.
So because you do unlock achievements like that, but it's not necessarily, you know, it's not with the clearance of the stages, because you also get achievements at the end of each stage that is just green or blue or yellow or whatever. Like, that's the thing that pops up there. So I don't think I got all of them, but I did get some of them.
I'm not sure I got all of them either, actually, but it became like apparent. Or to me, sorry, I'm not meaning to imply that because this didn't come across to you, you didn't get it or
no,
whatever.
No. I mean, as I say, like, I knew it is, you know, it is very evidently about grief all the way through, but yeah, just I didn't see that pattern and that was kind of connecting to those stages of grief as clearly as that. Like, to me, ultimately, like, each section was just, you know, a clever little twist or a clever little upgrade on the core puzzle platforming mechanics, and so it was, you know, adding a bit of new colour, and it generally added a new power, for want of a better word, like turning yourself into a block or whatever. But I was never at any point going like, this part of the game is specifically saying this thing to me, other than when you're under attack from the sort of black shape-shifting creature. That was the times when you're like, this is quite clearly about depression and about your own self or your own doubt or the kind of monsters in your head coming for you. But those moment-to-moment bits, like climbing about on trees that disappear or light up when you jump around them or whatever, like, I don't see that that's too closely connected with any particular idea.
Interestingly, so the reason why you're jumping about the trees is because you are trying to knock down apples for your little robot friend. And in that particular stage is bargaining, which is generally the stage with which you are asking for help. That is what this is supposed to be. Can I just say, like, this psychologically, this model is not great for various reasons. While all these are things that people may experience when they are in a state of grief, they don't necessarily have to experience all of these. They do not experience all of these in any particular order. They don't necessarily experience all these things once. They don't necessarily experience all these things individually. Grief is a very, very complicated fucking process that you go through. However, in the simplest fucking terms, bargaining is sort of when you're asking for help and when you're trying to interact with other people, I suppose. So you're coming from anger, you're coming from a place of anger, and your little robot friend that you find in this section is initially running away from you until you knock one of the trees and give him an apple, in which you form a little bond with him, and by the end of it he ends up giving you one of the wee orbs of light and whatever. So yeah, genuinely I thought this all kind of thematically tied in quite nicely.
So, yeah. Maybe like I wasn't sort of thinking about it as deeply while playing it, but like, because I see what you're saying, but at the same time, like, that robot section to me just felt like an extension of when we had to sort of release the little red birds which let you boost up, or it was just like another version of, there was trees made of water that you could swim through or whatever. Like, I mean, and you're probably going to tell me that they all do mean something now, but like, they all just felt to me like typical puzzle platformer mechanics and not necessarily connected to a story, quote unquote, which, because I always just felt while playing it that the story was being delivered through its visuals and through its kind of tone and through the broad brushes of its scene setting. So you know, as I say, the recurrent feature of the enormous statue of a woman whose hand you stand in and who you seem to like levitate from and burst into tears at the end of each section. I mean, those moments make it very clear that it is about loss or about some kind of like mother-daughter or similar relationship, but perhaps I just was not thinking about it as deeply as that while playing it. But yeah, can absolutely see what it is that you're pointing to, but I just, like, again, if you're not keyed into that, unless I'm mistaken about this as well, it never mentions this theory within the game, right? Like the Kubler-Ross.
Well, no, but it's not heavy-handed in that way.
Exactly.
It's not trying to do that.
I realise that's a known thing.
It's supposed to be only a bit of interpretation and be slightly more abstract than knocking you across the head with, oh, by the way, this is what this game's about, and we're going to take you through it step by step.
But that's all I mean, is to say that if you remove those achievement notifications, which do key directly into that, if you just handed this game to someone and said play it, I'm not sure that they would necessarily take all of that from it, because a lot of what it does feels very similar.
Take all that from it necessarily. Obviously you didn't, but it's all there if you want to find it. Is sort of my point. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's there. Yeah, it is definitely there. But whether or not it necessarily spoke to you, because I'm slightly disappointed, I have to say, that the thematic story of the game never quite landed with you in the same way that it landed with me, because I honestly thought it was spectacularly good. But I do just want to touch on the art, because holy fucking shit, man, it was stunning. Like, the actual visuals of the game were incredible. Can I just say, see the animations, and quite often Gris is very small on the screen, but the camera pans in and out in such an incredible way as well, with such dramatic effect, I find. Like, I don't think camera zooms have ever been used so well in a fucking game. It is incredible sometimes, the epic moments that often come as well with like the swelling of the music, which is also just so incredibly beautiful. It's usually just fairly simple, like keys and strings, but fucking holy shit, they absolutely make that work 100%. But the animations are just beautiful, and it's just tiny little movements here and there and everywhere, and everything just is so smooth. In a game that I thought might not have had things like that, and I just thought everything looked just so incredible and fluid and wonderful. The look and everything of the game and the music and everything was fantastic. It really was incredible.
I would totally align with those comments. Yeah, I think it's a really visually stunning game, and as you say as well, I think that that's what you're getting at. Knowing going into it how beautiful it looked, because you know it slams you over the head with it. All the promotional stuff for the game, the key art on the download, all of it is like, this game looks beautiful. There's no escape from that. But then the animations within that, like, it isn't just that it's got big picturesque backgrounds or whatever. Like when, for example, when you do turn into the block and you struggle against the wind and you keep moving forward, the weight of that and the sort of heft of it, you can feel it and you can see it in the animations. I remember a section quite early on, it might have been like the start of the second proper section, where you kind of emerge on the top of a temple or of one of the buildings or whatever, and you're completely framed by the sun, and it follows like you're held in the middle of that sun as you walk forward, and it's
so ridiculously good. It's so good.
That was the stuff that I did really like about it, and in some ways I think that came to a affect my opinion of it as a game, which was that I felt like I was watching a piece of art, but that didn't really know what it wanted to do gameplay-wise. Like, it was just kind of like, here's some really beautiful environments and as you say, some wonderful music, and generally, like, a very chill, nice place to spend time.
That's an excellent point, I have to say. Like, this was one of the most serene and calm experience.
Totally.
Although it was, again, dealing with quite heavy themes, but honestly, Matt, like, I don't know what else to call it apart from, like, stunningly beautiful.
Yeah.
It just
if you've not seen this, if you haven't played along with us on this one, Google some screenshots of this game, like, or look at a little bit of gameplay. That, as you've heard from us, there's not a lot to spoil necessarily, because the story is kind of very broad brush. And so you can look at it and you can see, like, it is kind of incomparable in some ways. I mean, you do get indie games that look and feel good like this, but it has a real painterly illustrator effect to it. Like, it does look like a picture book. And
I think it's very clearly like watercolor influenced as well.
Absolutely.
Like,
and you do get those great moments at the end of each section when you unlock the new color and it kind of washes through the world and becomes trees in the green section, or the kind of red sandstony buildings in the red section. And all of that stuff, like, its presentation was second to none. I think as a game, from moment one, or from pretty much the moment that you unlock the turning into a block mechanic, I thought, I really hope one of these is a dash mechanic, because the movement to me felt quite slow. Maybe I'm just thinking, like, coming off the back of stuff like Celeste and Hollow Knight, not that they're similar games at all, obviously. I just wanted that, like, the dash and the movement and the speed, and it just felt a little bit like, okay, I'm walking from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. There's times I just wanted, like, a wee bit more from it.
I do sort of understand that from a gameplay perspective, I suppose, but I believe that the point in this game was supposed to be a sort of Journey meets Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I think that that's actually quite a good comparison, because although you say that you don't think you knew what it wanted to do gameplay-wise, whereas I think that they did know what they wanted to do gameplay-wise, because they wanted it to feel like a journey. It wasn't necessarily about putting big challenges in front of you and making you overcome it. It was about the journey or the process of going through grief, and the fact that all these colours, that they all sort of, as you continue to unlock them, they all sort of bled together, and it was a quite nice analogy of how, although they were using this frankly antiquated model now, is that it still spoke to the fact that grief is this journey and things can happen simultaneously. And the good thing about games like this, because they are relatively abstract, you can interpret your own thing into them, which I think is important and is part of the thing that makes it artistic. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what it sort of comes down to me. Like, this to me feels a lot more like a game that you could point to and go, oh yeah, video games are art because of stuff like this. And to me, it lives in a very small section of games that you can point to and go, well, if video games aren't art, then what the fuck do you call this sort of thing? But to you, it seems to have landed slightly differently, which is quite disappointing to me, because I fucking love this.
I think it landed exactly there for me, but, like, on that side of it being it's more art than game, and it just in that sense it wasn't as interesting as I hoped it would be. Like, I guess I wanted a very visually beautiful, good puzzle platformer, and instead what we got was an extremely visually and sonically beautiful, kind of mediocre puzzle platformer, I guess is where I'm landing on it.
I cannot believe that you're marking this game down for being more art than game from the man that absolutely adores Kentucky Route Zero.
I knew you were going to bring Kentucky Route Zero
absolutely
again.
Outrageous. All right, I think we've got to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really, really helps us out. There's a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, that just helps us out even more. And I know I say this twice a week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You are an absolute legend to us. Alright, Lewis, it's time to announce our new play-along game for this month, and it will be the mobile game Florence, which I am very, very excited to play again. It is a staggering thing, to be honest with you, for a game that is less than an hour. Yes, less than an hour long, and it costs about £3, so no excuse not to buy it, in my opinion, and it is remarkable, I think.
Yeah, just in case you're thinking I'm not paying any money for a game that lasts less than an hour, it is something quite interesting and quite special. It's
the best mobile game I've ever played.
Yeah, it has a real kind of a plot with real heart to it. It makes a point, and even though it lasts only that short amount of time, I think most people will get something from it, particularly if you're like an adult and you've gone through some pretty normal adult stuff in your time. You're going to enjoy this and take something quite meaningful from it, I think.
Yeah, it's incredible. Really, really incredible game, and it's actually something I've wanted to get around to doing for a long time, so I'm very glad that it's here.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.